Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your new safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. On the menu for, believe it or not, this 15th episode, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, children. He killed himself. Everybody's favorite billionaire, that Billy boy Bill Gates, he tries to buy himself a Nobel Peace Prize. The LA Lakers are going to be your Western Conference finalists, and Hollywood once again lays down to the altar of communism. But before we get to all that, I'd like to announce that I have begun a Patreon account. That's right. This is Why I Don't Vote podcast on Patreon. Please go and visit the page. If you like what you hear, please support the podcast. Now, some of you may visit that page and say, wow, this is some primitive shit here. Yes, it is primitive. That's why I need your support. Me no internet good. Me need help. I appreciate the attention. I appreciate the support. Now, on to the main attraction.
Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. Get over it.
Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, kids. That's how that went down. He was alive. He was in prison. He understood the gravity of what was going on, the weight of those four walls, the fact that he was looking at his likely home, if not for the next 20 years, for the rest of his life, and he killed himself. There is absolutely no conspiracy here. None whatsoever. And the problems with the prison system have been known for decades. We all know all of the issues that exist with the prison system, yet we want to ignore them when we want to ignore them. And specific when it comes to prisons in this country, that's all the time. So all we're going to do here, dear listener, is outline some of the things that, yes, you already know exist, put them into the perspective of the Jeffrey Epstein suicide, and put to bed this dumbass murder theory once and for all. As you know, dear listener, as you well know, prisons have been privatized in this country. Yes, in the United States of America, many of the prisons are run by private companies. Governments, local, state, even federal, contract with private companies to manage and run prisons. If you were listening to this podcast, I'm giving you credit for having better sense, a better education when it comes to economics than 99% of any politician that's ever been elected or anyone that's ever truly believed in any politician. Private companies are in business to make a profit. It does not matter what their business is, whether it's manufacturing a product or providing a service. Private companies are in business to make money. A private company is looking to maximize the amount of its profits while minimizing its overhead, its costs, its expenses. Simple profit and loss analysis. Increase, maximize the amount of the profits, the money that you're bringing in. Decrease, limit the amount of the money that you're spending on overhead, on costs, on expenses. Simple economics. Now let's put that into the context of prisons. And in doing so, we're going to use the complaints of prison reform advocates and prisoners as the backdrop for this review. Please note that although you may not be sympathetic to the complaints, once you look at those complaints from the lens of a private company looking to maximize profit, they all seem very reasonable. They all seem very likely. The easiest place to begin is prison overcrowding. If you're running a private prison and you're given a number of dollars per prisoner at your prison, you want to increase the head count as high as you can get it. There is no such thing as prison overcrowding according to the companies that are running the prisons. That's not a problem in their mind. Higher the headcount, more dollars. But what problems are created for any operator of a prison system when you have a higher headcount? You need more guards and you need more amenities. You're going to have to feed more people. You're going to have to clothe more people. You're going to have the accommodations for more people. Here's where our first bit of critical thinking comes into play, dear listener. Too many prisoners in a prison, according to the prisoners, prison reform advocates, etc. Prison officials, they may acknowledge as much, but the private enterprises that are running those prisons, they really don't care. Politicians, they really don't care. And to be clear, dear listener, you and I, the public, we really don't care. Our government, our media, our school systems, they've been very effective at communicating to us people in prison are guilty, they're criminals. Prison is not about rehabilitation, it is about punishment. If these prisons are overcrowded, if these conditions are terrible, these people deserve it. They are being punished. I'm a lemming, you're a lemming, we buy. We fall right off the cliff with everyone else. These people are being punished, so be it. Once the private company recognizes that the politician doesn't care, that the public doesn't care, they can take the next step in maximizing their profits in running a prison. What are the next steps? Limit the number of staff that you actually have to employ to manage and run that prison. Whether it be prison guards, whether it be administrators, whether it be any third-party vendors. Limit the number of people. You increase the head count of the actual prison population, you decrease the head count of staff, employees, contractors. Simple economics. More money coming in based on head count, less money going out based on your overhead, your staff costs. And here's the most brilliant, yet probably sinister, step that a prison could take, whether it be private or public. The politicians don't care about these people. The public don't care about these people. They're being, quote unquote, punished. They're not being rehabilitated. Why do they need so many amenities? Why do they need 3 meals a day? Why do they need to take a shower every day? Why do they need clean linens every day? As many prison reform advocates have stated, for decades, dear listener, again, for decades, there isn't enough food served to prisoners. Prisoners are not getting clean clothing, clean linens every single day. John Q. Public, Jane Q. Public looks at their water bill every month, their energy bill every month, and thinks, how can I reduce as much? Think about a prison. How much water is being used just to bathe people? How much electricity is being used just to keep the lights on? If you're running a private prison, here are very easy ways to limit your overhead costs, your expenses. Less food, less water, less electricity. Don't need to feed these people as much. Don't need to bathe these people as much. And you certainly don't need to provide them clean linens, clean clothes every day. Now let's get to it. The guards. I mentioned it before, right? We're going to cut down on the overhead by limiting the number of staff, whether they be prison guards, administrators, third-party contractors. Out of those three, what's the most expensive? It's the prison guards. So as prison populations rise, although you are hiring more prison guards, prison reform advocates, prisoners themselves, come out and say they're not hiring enough guards to match the rise in the actual prison population. Every one of you listening to this, everyone in the public knows this to be true. This is no different than hiring teachers to manage the increase in the number of students per classroom. All of us know that many public schools have done a terrible job at that. We are aware as a public that many schoolrooms have 40, 45 students in them, whereas 20 years ago, they may have only had 25. And even if these prisons were going on a massive hiring spree, who wants to do that job? That's a shit job. There's a huge movement right now, the backlash to this defund the police, where people are talking about how important police officers are, how much we should bestow respect on them. Think about how dangerous it is to be a police officer, and then think about why that is. Because you're interacting with a criminal element, and you're not sure when you may interact with that criminal element. They don't often announce themselves. You're very often going into those situations unaware. Yes, dear listener, yes, there is a psychological element to that uncertainty that must weigh on an individual. But think about a prison guard. You have no doubts when you go into work about whether or not you're dealing with a criminal element. And depending on what kind of prison that you work at, you may be dealing with some of the most dangerous human beings on the face of the earth. Is this a lucrative, high-paying job in light of its psychological, its physical, its mental requirements? Hell no. Hell no, the pay is terrible. Awful job dealing with some of the most dangerous people on the face of the planet. Terrible hours, psychological strain, and they don't pay you dick. So the very fact that any prison system, whether it's public or private, can find a population of people who are willing to do this job, that in and of itself is amazing. Are the guards that are currently working in these prisons getting pay raises commensurate with the increase in the population of these prisons? No. Are there enough guards being hired to manage this massive increase in the prison population? No. That's why prison unions are some of the strongest unions in this country. Again, go and look at the evidence. You've heard it all. You've heard these stories now for decades. Prison guard in this prison makes a mistake. Prison guard in that prison abuses prisoner. Unless it's a very high-profile problem, very often these prison guards are simply placed on some sort of administrative leave. They aren't fired. It's a terrible job. No one wants to do it. There's very little career advancement. You're not going to make any more money, whether you've been there for 5 years, 8 years. Yes, I'm sure there is an increase in the pay scale, but the pay scale for those types of jobs is really not commensurate with the weight of the responsibility. Add into that very strong unions, and what do you have? Is that little hamster wheel in your head starting to spin, dear listener? Prison guards routinely make mistakes. Prison guards routinely breach protocols. If you as a prison guard, or if your union representative is making pleas to politicians, is making pleas to state, to federal governments, is making pleas to these companies managing these private prisons, all of it goes unheard. All of it goes unanswered. Prison populations rise, amenities drop, the prisoners are underfed, unwashed, poorly clothed. These are going to be harder people to manage in a prison system, in a prison setting. There is no incentive to do a better job. There is no monetary reward. The public, the politicians, they all believe these people deserve to be where they're at, deserve to be punished. The only reprimand that you're going to get for doing something wrong is basically not having to come to work and very likely being paid during that brief absence. All there is the stick. Do you understand that, dear listener? There is no carrot. Do good, who cares? Do poorly, meh, slap on the wrist. Tell me I'm wrong, dear listener. Tell me this isn't the state of affairs in our prison systems. Tell me you don't know this already. Now, let's apply it to the Jeffrey Epstein situation. Did someone sneak into this prison having crafted some diabolical plan and murder Jeffrey Epstein? Was it another prisoner who was put up to it by some nefarious cabal. No. They did what they did every night. They played around on the internet a little bit. They had to go and make X amount of bed checks. They didn't do it. They only made Y amount of bed checks. They did the same thing that they do night in and night out. And this leads me to my next point about the whole conspiracy that the man was murdered. Jeffrey Epstein simply killed himself. When you're in that environment and you know that you're not getting out, when you know these places are completely overcrowded, we're not being fed enough, we're not bathing enough, we're not getting clean clothes, people don't give a damn that this is happening, and you're going to have to survive in this environment with some of the most dangerous people on planet Earth, you kill yourself. Prison suicides are not that uncommon an occurrence. Jeffrey Epstein was in a particular part of this prison on purpose because people involved in prison administration, people involved in the politics of prisons, whether it be the funding of them or the management of them, they know prison suicide is not that uncommon, particularly when you have someone who is completely foreign to that environment. So if this were some no-name white-collar criminal who got put into the same situation, which, by the way, very infrequently happens now because even judges, even prosecutors understand that our prison system has become so dangerous that you simply can't put certain types of people into it and expect that they will survive. But if that were the type of person who had ended up killing themselves, and in particular, if it had been some poor minority who was there on a drug charge, this wouldn't be a blip on the radar. It'd be another prison suicide. It would have been chalked up in some statistic somewhere. Everything moves forward. It is often, dear listener, that we don't really associate the problems that have been manifesting and are being exhibited in certain facets of our lives until there is a high-profile example of that failure, of the manifestation. Jeffrey Epstein is just a manifestation of that failure. The prison systems are a mess. You and I both know it. You've got prison guards that, frankly, have no hope. In addition, they have no fear. They have no hope that their job situation is ever going to change, but they have no fear that doing a poor job is going to result in them being fired. Now, people are going to try to build a conspiracy out of the Jeffrey Epstein situation, but the fact of the matter is, there was no struggle in his cell. There simply wasn't. And I love how people come up with these stupid-ass theories. Well, this wasn't possible for one person to do. If you're sitting in a room by yourself for hours on end, day after day, you will figure out the contours of that room. You will figure out what's possible and what isn't possible. Never underestimate human possibility, even when it's negative and desperate. Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, kids, plain and simple. Now, there was a story that came out in the wake of the investigation. These two guards, they didn't do all their rounds. They're goofing off on the internet. They were placed on administrative leave. And now I think there's a criminal sentence and they're being given a deferred sentence and 100 hours of community service. Oh, the Puritans, the sexually repressed Puritans come out of the woodwork. This is outrageous. Moral outrage. Moral outrage. We need an investigation. This is way too light a sentence. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This is a perfectly appropriate sentence. In light of everything that we've just discussed, how is it that any of these so-called politicians, any of these so-called pundits, can have moral outrage as to the sentence being handed these two prison guards? There's no moral outrage at the prison population and the fact that within the four walls of these prisons, there's way too many prisoners. There's no moral outrage about private companies affording these prisoners less and less amenities, food, water, clothing. This would naturally increase the hostility of any population of humans. There's no moral outrage at the fact that there aren't enough prison guards and the ones that actually do exist aren't getting paid enough. You built that system, you stupid dildo, and now you want to go off vibrating when you have an opportunity to get your name on social media, on the news, in a paper. This is another day that ends in Y in the prison system in the United States of America in the 21st century. It just so happened that the guy that ended up killing himself happened to be one of the most brilliant and prolific pedophiles that may have ever existed. If you want to prevent a situation where one of the most brilliant and prolific pedophiles doesn't have the opportunity to kill himself, maybe you should have built a better mousetrap. This sentence is more an indictment of the system itself and all of the different actors, all of the different stakeholders, than it is an indictment of these two prison guards. Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. These two prison guards are going to do some community service. They're going to go back to work. And somebody else in 6, 8, 12 months is going to kill themselves. Fact of the matter is, folks, you and I just don't care. Of course, that is, until we do.
Act 2 when I'm wrong. I say I'm wrong.
From the limited number of people that actually listen to this podcast, I actually received some feedback with regard to my analogy of Bill Gates being like Tiger Woods with respect to the Jeffrey Epstein episode. The pushback being twofold. One, Tiger Woods was having consensual sex with a number of women, but it could not be argued that they were doing so against their will. The second point, and although I believe I made this point in my podcast, Tiger Woods is certainly not trying to be a moral authority. He was an athlete. He had an opportunity. He capitalized on that opportunity like probably no athlete had since Wilt Chamberlain. I'm really not going to speak to these points because what happened over the course of the week has clarified that, in fact, the Tiger Woods situation and the Bill Gates situation is completely different. But, so that you understand, dear listener, when I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong.
When I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong.
Of course, that's the immortal Jerry Orbach in the movie Dirty Dancing. Kids, consult your Google machine. You probably know Jerry better from Law & Order, the longtime detective Lenny Briscoe. So what were these events that came to light? What were the facts that had come out over the relationship between Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein? Anyone associated to Epstein, there's an instant assumption that it was related to sex. A reasonable assumption to make in light of the fact that he's probably one of the most prolific pedophiles as far as access and opportunity in recent memory. I mean, the man basically built an international infrastructure in order to do this. What was interesting about the Bill Gates revelation was the fact that he wasn't trying to cozy up to Jeffrey Epstein because of underage girls or the possibility of sex. No. Bill Gates was cozying up to Jeffrey Epstein to win a Nobel Prize, specifically the Nobel Peace Prize, at least according to these reports. What's damning about these reports is that many of them have an accompanying photograph. It's Jeffrey, and there's Billy. And who's Billy Gates there with? A man named Thorbjørn Jagland. I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I'm not going to try to pronounce that correctly. But the man is head of the Nobel Prize Committee. Billy has the money. But what Billy needed was the access. And Jeffrey Epstein, for some reason, had the access, had a relationship with the head of the Nobel Prize Committee. Again, I think in the public consciousness, I think we all believe that somehow sex was involved. But that's the interesting thing about these matters, dear listener. I don't know that sex was involved. This could have been purely about money. I think a good example to look at in order to illustrate as much is the debacle with the World Cup award to Qatar and the subsequent lawsuits, the criminal investigations, the criminal charges filed by the FBI in the United States. As much as it could have been about sex or drugs, the FIFA scandal was about money. You had a very rich country that has one of the hottest temperatures in the summer on planet Earth somehow win a bid for the world's largest international football, right, soccer tournament during the summer. Somehow, without any of the stadiums built sufficient to host this tournament, Qatar convinced FIFA to not only have the tournament in this country, but to schedule it outside of the normal months that the tournament would have been held. Again, the tournament is not being held in Qatar during the summer as it would have been had it been in another country. Qatar somehow, hint, hint, convinced FIFA to not only have that tournament in one of the hottest areas on earth with no infrastructure to support it, but to move the date of the tournament to support as much. How did they accomplish all of this? Money. It turns out, for all the pomp and circumstance, the FIFA committee that awards these World Cup tournaments was corrupt as hell. You see this with the Olympic Committee, another international organization with a mission to unite everyone in sport. Since the Winter Olympic Games were held in Salt Lake City, Utah, years ago, it has come to the attention of the public that the Olympic Committee is corrupt as hell. The demands that they make of the host city are so outrageous, are so egregious, that I have heard many pundits and economists speculate, and I agree with them completely, that in the future, the only countries that are going to be able to host the Olympics are autocratic countries, are countries where the Olympic Committee does not have to appeal but to one single authoritative body, or in terms of an autocracy, one single person. That single person can ensure that Olympic Committee members have all of the amenities that they want, have all of the prostitutes that they want, have all of the restricted access to the infrastructure of the actual city that they want. They will be given a free pass to do practically anything that they want in that city during the Olympic Games, including, but not limited to, having free access to all the restaurants, all the boutiques, all of the different retail vendors that they could ever dream. The Olympics is all about money. It's not about international competition. It's not about spirit or goodwill amongst men, amongst countries. It's all about the money. Hey, are you proud of that college degree? Are you proud of the rigorous academic standards that your university employs to select its student body and the rigorous academic curriculum that the university employs to educate, to teach, to have these students grow into the capable adults that it's going to produce as a testament to that university's mission statement? If you find yourself saying, yes, I do feel that way, how do you feel now to know that pretty much any of those universities had a pay-to-play entry? As the college admission scandal demonstrated, rich people could just buy their children admission to a number of different types of universities. All those academic credentials, all of that academic rigor, that's all bullshit. It's all about the money. So here we are in the present. Here we are with Billy Boy. Billy Boy Gates and his buddy Jeffrey Epstein cozying up to the chair, the head of the Nobel Prize Committee in Norway. The Nobel Prize is just like your college diploma. The Nobel Prize is just like your Olympic gold medal. The Nobel Prize is just like the World Cup. It's for sale. When you realize that, when you think about it critically, not cynically, this all makes sense. The relationship between Billy Boy Gates and Jeffrey Epstein had nothing to do with sex. It was about access to buy a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, what kind of person are you going to be dealing with in order to gain access to buy such an award? This reminds me of an analogy. Prosecutors use this all the time when they're prosecuting organized crime figures and they're having witnesses come to testify against them, who are very often organized crime figures. There are no saints in that den of thieves. There are no virtuous actors with clean hands coming in to testify who have worked in that environment. Likewise, when you're going to buy a Nobel Peace Prize, the medium that you're going to go through is probably going to be a nefarious actor. That just shows you how much of an egomaniac Bill Gates is. Bill Gates didn't give a damn if he had to go through a pedophile to get access to the head of the Nobel Prize Committee. Bill Gates was going to then go through a pedophile. Bill Gates was going to get him a Nobel Peace Prize. He had the money to do it. All he needed was the medium. He found the medium, and he used that medium. Now, Bill Gates may come off and say, well, the environment and sustainability and access to good health care in third world countries and blah, blah, blah. The road to hell, Billy boy, is paved with good intentions. The second you realized that in order to accomplish your goals of getting a Nobel Peace Prize, of promoting yourself and thereby, maybe in your own mind, promoting these ideals that you believe in, the second that you realized that you needed to go through a pedophile in order to do that, you should have rethought. Maybe I can be patient on this one. Maybe there's another way. What strikes me as so weird about this entire debacle is that whoring one's body is so frowned upon by what we would call polite society. Yet whoring one's values, whoring one's soul, well, that's widely accepted. You see this in religion. You see this in politics. You see it all the time. When, dear listener, did the body become so sacrosanct for so many people? As I've said to you before in previous podcasts, what do you see littered on every corner of every street in this great country, the United States of America? A Walmart or a McDonald's. No one patronizing Walmart or McDonald's treats their body like a temple. If you've said the word supersize me in the last 6 months of your life, you do not treat your body like a temple. The world would be a much happier place and everyone's dreams would come true if we would stop demeaning and looking down on the person whoring their body and instead demean and look down on the person whoring their values, their soul.
Act for those goddamn LA Lakers.
As many of you are aware, I am a resident of the Valley of the Sun. I have watched all 3 of the National Basketball Association contests between 1 Phoenix Suns and 1 LA Lakers. The Lakers are a healthy basketball team. After watching these 3 contests, there's no doubt in my mind the Lakers are going to win the West. You heard it here first, dear listener. The Lakers are going to win the West. Davis, Drummond, Gasol. It's not fair. With that much size, with those bigs and their athleticism, the fact that you can put Davis and Gasol out on the 3-point line and they can move in from there, it's not fair. The LA Lakers are a 7 seed only because of injury, and they're not injured anymore. One person who clearly is injured is one Chris Paul, and it's a sad commentary on, I believe, his entire career. He never seems to be at 100% during the playoffs. Because of that, the teams that he's been on have never enjoyed the types of success in the playoffs that they probably deserved based on the record that they had over a course of 82-game seasons. But fair or not, that's life. He's hurt again. He's not as effective again. And the team that he plays for is going to suffer because of it. It just so happens that team is the Phoenix Suns. They happen to be a 2 seed. I don't think that means anything. I don't think that means anything against a quote-unquote 7 seed LA Lakers team that is fully healthy. And without a healthy Chris Paul, I don't know that the Suns are going to win another game in that series. I think it's a foregone conclusion that the Nets are going to win in the East, and we're going to have ourselves an LA Lakers Brooklyn Nets NBA final. You heard it here first, dear listener.
Act 4. Although it may have been wrongfully labeled as much in the 50s, Hollywood is now nothing more than a bunch of communist sympathizers.
There's a Fast and Furious 9. Hell yeah. That's exactly what we needed. A 9th installment. I say this with a measure of pride, of dignity, of self-respect. I have never seen in its entirety any of the Fast and Furious movies. Not one. Evidently, John Cena is now part of this latest installment and was doing a promotional tour in Taiwan to get the peoples jazzed up about the film. Ignorantly, and I mean this in the most respectful sense, ignorantly, Cena says, "Hey, great to be in the country of Taiwan." Quick history lesson, kids. Most Western countries recognize Taiwan as a country. What is the history of Taiwan? World War II, it ends, we win. USA, USA, USA. Immediately after the end of the war, revolution in China. Nationalists versus communists. The US, Great Britain, France, pretty much everyone in the West supports the nationalists. The Soviet Union supports the communists. Mao versus Chiang Kai-shek. To the surprise and dismay of everyone in the West, the communists eventually win. The nationalist government is exiled from China. The nationalist government flees to a place called Taiwan. The nationalist government immediately sets up independent Chinese government. This is an exiled government in Taiwan that is basically stating, look, we're the legitimate Chinese government. We just happen to lose this war. We're going to set up shop right next to China. All of the Western powers immediately recognize this government in Taiwan as the legitimate Chinese government, and they immediately recognize the sovereignty of Taiwan as an independent nation. The communists, the Soviet Union, and the newly formed Chinese Communist government do not recognize Taiwan as the legitimate Chinese government, as an independent or sovereign nation. The communists say, hey, that Taiwan there, that's just part of China. And there's just a bunch of assholes there that we beat in this war that are holding out hope that somehow they're going to be able to creep back in and reestablish their reign. That all went down in the 50s. I think this really came about in 1955. Since 1955, that's been the state of affairs between Taiwan and China. John Cena goes to promote a movie in Taiwan, simply and ignorantly says, hey, great to be in the country of Taiwan. The Chinese government freaks out. Why? Because they're a bunch of communists. And the communists do not recognize Taiwan as a separate or independent sovereign, an independent nation. The communists believe that Taiwan still has a bunch of traitors who are holding out that they might come back into power one day. Taiwan is a Chinese territory. So what do the communists do? They threaten to ban the release of this Fast and Furious installment in China. As we've discussed here before on the podcast, as much money as any of the producers in Hollywood might think that they're going to generate from the release of a movie here in the United States, it's either equal to or less than, again, equal to or less than the amount of money that they hope to generate by releasing that movie in China. They're actually now gambling on Chinese markets producing as much revenue or more for these films. So what is the end result? John Cena has to go on social media and apologize for what he said when he was in Taiwan. What's interesting about this is that many people in Hollywood during the 1950s, again, see the correlation? Communist revolution during the 40s and into the 50s, communist paranoia in the States, particularly in Hollywood. Many people in Hollywood were labeled communists or communist sympathizers. Wrongfully so. It became known as the Red Scare, the Red Terror. Now, were there some people in Hollywood at the time that were communists? Certainly. Certainly there were. But it was one of those things where it simply spiraled out of control. And we've talked about this in other podcasts, dear listeners, about the online mob. Well, you didn't have any online mob in the 1950s. You had a real mob. And that real mob actually began to cannibalize itself. Anyone that dissented from the ravenous, ever-changing, and accusatory mob position was then labeled a communist or a communist sympathizer. The irony couldn't be any more thick, could it, dear listener? Here you had, at one point in time in our nation's history, a mob basically accusing anyone in Hollywood with any kind of independent thought of being a communist or a communist sympathizer. And here in the 21st century, where we purport as a people to have independent thought, to have individual liberties and freedoms. Here we have a Hollywood that is beholden to the communist dogma, beholden to the state. The communists will get what the communists want out of Hollywood because of the money, because Hollywood can't turn down that money. Now, I'm not a big fan of Hollywood or movies in general because most of them suck. I mean, Hollywood's biggest problem to me isn't that they're communist sympathizers or that they've got some sort of new woke agenda. It's that all their movies are terrible. They're simple, they're contrived, most of it now is CGI, and the CGI is even weak and pathetic. How many times are we going to see someone blow up a bridge or building? How many of these superhero movies can we stomach? But you throw in the fact that Hollywood at the same time is trying to have a woke agenda and then also kowtow to the Communist Party line. Where in that is there a place for art? For all intents and purposes, movies are a form of art. There is no place for art in communism. There is no place for art in woke agendas. And look at the irony in those two polar opposites, dear listener. You've got a Hollywood that's trying at the same time, nationally, domestically, to promote some woke agenda, and then internationally trying to appease communists. It's absolutely laughable. These are not harmonic or sympathetic positions to take. You cannot at the same time promote a woke agenda nationally and a communist agenda internationally. I'm proud of us as a people. I'm proud of people in the West because even before COVID, movie attendance was declining. And many of the pieces of crap that were produced and put out during COVID did not generate the type of numbers, the type of interest that Hollywood expected. This is the oldest form of cancel culture. This is the oldest form of boycott. You simply stop patronizing. There's no movement. There's no organized event. You just see the same crappy content over and over again. You lose interest. You stop paying for it. It will be interesting to see how the development in the West play out with regard to the types of movies that Hollywood produces over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. My prediction, I think Hollywood is going to become like the tobacco industry. Westerners are going to move on from these big budget, bloated, CGI-filled shitfests that pass as blockbuster movies. The market is saturated. We're done. We don't want that anymore. But they do in China. You're dealing with a population of people who are just now getting some of the things that we in the West got 40, 50 years ago. The tobacco companies are making as much money now as they ever did because they're exporting their product to Asia, to China. Hollywood, whether it sees it or not, is on that same path. I believe in market economics. I believe in capitalism. When that gap is created by this crappy Hollywood product that no one in the West wants anymore, you will see more independent films. You will see more films produced by the likes of Amazon and Netflix. Although the same temptations will be there, it will be interesting to see whether or not these companies will also kowtow to the communists in order to get their productions released in China. For people who still see movies as art, for people who still want to see a quality film once in a while, that independent marketplace is going to provide as much. I couldn't be more excited about it. Let Hollywood embrace its relationship with communist dollars and let it become an afterthought in American popular culture. In a capitalist country, In a country that embraces markets, there will be a replacement to fill in the gap. And as consumers, we will not miss a beat. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.